This video broke my brain a little bit. I've rewritten the script about 8 times because I keep going backwards and forwards over whether the 180-degree rule matters or not when it comes to comics. And I've finally come to the conclusion that it does. Most of the time. But before I explain the why, I need to explain the what. So what is the 180-degree rule? Well, it's a film term, but it applies to pretty much all visual storytelling. Basically, it establishes where our characters are in relation to one another. If character A is on the left, then character B is on the right. And as we cut between the two, they should stay where they are relative to each other, unless they're intentionally moving around like in a fight scene, or if they're your child and they just won't sit down while I have 5 minutes to myself. Anyway, if you imagine an invisible line in between two characters in a scene, then the camera cannot cross it. It can travel 180 degrees, but it cannot cross the line. If it does, then the characters that we've established will now be flipped, which will cause confusion for the audience. In our case, the reader will be taken out of our story as they try to figure out who is talking to who. So let's see how this looks in a comic page. I have 2 pages here of 2 characters talking to each other. One of these pages adheres to the rule and the other one doesn't. How much of a distraction you find this page is personal to you, but generally speaking you want to try and avoid doing things like this. That's because it isn't always clear who is talking, because it appears that their relative positions are changing from panel to panel in ways that are unexplained. You would expect your characters to move a lot if a lot of movement is expected. Like in a fight scene, the characters are going to be all over the place. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to rigidly stick to the 180-degree rule. So far this is fairly simple to understand, but comics can make this a little more complicated. Unlike the practical reasons for this rule to be implemented for film, comics don't really have that same concern. And we might not need to worry too much about the reader not knowing who is talking to who if our characters are really distinct. If you have 2 humans talking to each other and they're both wearing suits, you'll want to make sure that the 180-degree rule is being followed, because otherwise the reader will have a hard time keeping up with what's going on. But if one of your characters is a rabbit human thing and the other one is a giant cyclops, then this is less likely to happen, because you can instantly tell them apart. You can also do this with colour. Even if you do have characters that are massively distinct from each other and you also use colour to help tell them apart, it's still worth knowing and implementing this rule within your work. Not only because that increases the chances of you maintaining clarity within your work, but it also gives you the chance to do what all artists want to do when it comes to rules: break them. There aren't specific times where you should intentionally break the 180-degree rule, but usually a creator will break it when they want to evoke chaos. It could be an obvious situation like a fight scene, or something a bit more subtle like emotional chaos. If a character is experiencing emotional chaos or trauma, then you could put the camera in lots of random different places to help sell that idea. If your character is confused, then confusing your reader by breaking this rule can help them empathize with that character. You might be able to see why I've been having a little bit of trouble with this video. On the one hand, the 180-degree rule makes total sense. You want to ensure that the reader can follow along, so you want to keep things consistent. But also, we're talking about comics, not films. We have the use of colour, character design, composition, and word balloons to help dictate the flow of our page. Whether you're in favour of the 180-degree rule or you think it's a waste of time, I think we can all agree that comics should be clear and consistent. Because that's what the 180-degree rule is there to provide anyway: clarity and consistency. I'll leave you with a name drop. I was lucky enough to meet Charlie Adlard outside a life drawing class a few years ago, and he kindly looked through some of my work, and I'll never forget what he said.
You tried your best and you failed miserably. The lesson is never try.
Okay, he didn't say that. He said as much as the artwork needed improvement, the panel choices were really good. And that's because they were clear and simple. It can be very easy to get overly excited and create loads of different weird panels to make your pages seem more exciting or interesting or dynamic, but unless you've got some experience under your belt, you're more likely to create a confusing page than an interesting one. So let's listen to Charlie and keep things clear, consistent and simple, at least for now. It's usually a good idea to lean on rules for guidance while we're creating, until we're comfortable enough to make an informed decision about breaking those same rules. But what do I know? I'm still not 100% settled on whether the 180-degree rule is even relevant for comics, so who knows? Consider subscribing if this helped clear anything up, and if it made you more confused, then subscribe anyway. I'll see you next week, and as always, have fun drawing.